Welcome to Responding to Human Trafficking for Pregnancy Resource Centers. Thank you so much for taking the time to look at this important and difficult topic. My name is Darlene, and we'll go through these modules together. This is Module 1, and we're going to answer the question, what is human trafficking? After completing this module, you will be able to define human trafficking, explain how human rights are violated by trafficking, describe 3 main categories of trafficking in persons, name a severe form of trafficking, and list reasons a trafficker would want a woman to continue pregnancy. The commodification of human beings, the trafficking of persons, and the buying and selling of their body parts cannot be taken lightly as some infrequent occurrence. It is said to be the fastest growing commercial enterprise on the earth today. Most of us have heard of drug trafficking. It may seem unimaginable that people would submit to traffickers to be bought and sold, especially adults, but it happens worldwide and involves millions of people. Modern-day slavery denies people their natural rights of personhood in a way that is similar to that of the African slaves, sometimes including the generational trauma that occurred as a result of that horrific injustice. Why not call it slavery? Exploitation of human beings can take on many forms, not just labor. Human trafficking doesn't always involve what might be considered work, but it always denies basic human autonomy. The definition of human trafficking is broken down into 3 elements: the criminal acts themselves, the means used to commit those acts, and the goals or forms of exploitation. So many Americans think chattel slavery is merely a thing of the past. Not only are we told that just one group of people owned another group of people, but that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Almost a century prior, our founders gave us the Declaration of Independence. In it, we see certain universal truths. It begins by establishing the cause these men were undertaking, which changed the course of history forever. Then, it spells out 3 basic human rights. Human trafficking violates these rights. Let's take a look at the history. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What if they seem willing? Consent can be tricky. Consent of the victim is irrelevant where illicit means are established. A strict definition of trafficking in persons is the action of recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or vulnerability, or the giving of payments or benefits to a person in control of the victim for the purpose of exploitation, which includes exploiting the prostitution of others, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery or similar practices, and the removal of organs. There are 3 main categories of trafficking in persons. Labor trafficking is the conscription of a person by force, fraud, or coercion, making that person work without reasonable compensation. Think of slavery. Forced labor can be anywhere. It may be right in plain sight. Sex trafficking is any commercial sexual exploitation of a person under 18 years old or that of an adult by force, fraud, or coercion. It may be prostitution, stripping, pornography, remote sex activities, illicit massage, or personal sexual servitude. Organ trafficking is just as it sounds. The removal of organs is big business in some areas of the world. It may be kidneys or other paired organs of those who are desperately poor. As we have seen, in the U.S., Planned Parenthood may have trafficked baby body parts. The number of people enslaved is estimated because most countries recognize that slavery is a human rights violation. It is illegal and often hidden. There may be no visible chains holding a person, no fences or cages. Most often, it's psychological, financial, and circumstantial bondage. The liberty of millions of men, women, and children is being infringed. Their right to life may be intact, but their right to liberty and subsequently their right to the pursuit of happiness is violated. This is contrary to our Declaration of Independence and contrary to natural law. Trafficking can involve any kind of labor. Property owners may bring people in and promise them a better life and a new start, but the trafficking victims are defrauded. They're brought to unfamiliar territory without identification or means of escape, and language barriers often contribute. Labor trafficking has many forms. It could be almost anywhere: agriculture, animal husbandry, begging, construction, domestic labor, fishing, food processing, landscaping, mining, restaurant labor, or traveling sales crews. Victims could even be forced to engage in illicit activity like stealing cars or running drugs. It is most important to remember that the definition of human trafficking is broken down into 3 lists of elements: the criminal acts, the means used to commit those acts, and the goals or forms of exploitation. Human trafficking is not about transportation, it's about exploitation. So trafficking doesn't always involve anything that could be considered work at all. For example, traffickers often use children and people with disabilities to beg. Babies and toddlers will be used as props for women, and as soon as they can walk and talk, the children will be forced to beg for long hours under the watchful eye of their handlers. They do not attend school or learn any other way of life. They know nothing but serving their masters. The issue of child brides isn't a common conversation in the U.S., but it has been a growing problem. Girls have been married as young teens for as long as we've been a country, but the numbers have grown and the age disparity has dramatically changed. Historically, laws allowed for very young people to marry, but typically both the bride and the groom were young. The influx of other cultures without modern civic education has brought awareness to very young girls marrying much older men. In your center, you might see teen moms. It's important to investigate their circumstances and autonomy. Any commercial sexual exploitation of anyone under 18 is also human trafficking. In many cases, a parent, relative, or other trusted adult begins the grooming process of abuse at a very young age. About 90% of victims of sexual exploitation disclose sexual abuse as children. Sexual abuse is an assault on personhood. Boys and girls without any understanding of their true identity are suffering even as you hear these words. The core violation of child sexual abuse will never totally leave them if they live to adulthood. This trauma affects the way the brain processes experiences. The essence of the human spirit is to love and be loved. Being used and abused distorts young minds. Pain and trauma retards their ability to develop executive reasoning skills. Unable to think about consequences or future repercussions, they become easy prey for traffickers and pimps. When anything of value is traded directly for sex, it falls under the term commercial. The exchange may be for cash, including EBT or cryptocurrency, drugs or alcohol if it's directly exchanged, clothing and jewelry and similar needs or desires, cell phones, smartphones, furnishings, childcare needs, transportation, housing, even food. Sex trafficking has many forms. Street prostitution most often comes to mind, but escort services and/or prostitution or brothels, stripping, cantinas, illicit massage, pornography, phone and remote interactive sex acts, sexting, and personal sexual servitude are all ways that traffickers exploit people. The right of an individual to be safe in their person is violated. Virtually anyone can become vulnerable to traffickers. A catastrophe, a major financial setback, or other traumatic event could place an adult in a situation a clever trafficker could exploit. The majority of sex trafficking victims are women, but men, especially young men and those who are gender confused, are also being targeted. Illicit massage parlors are notorious for commercial sexual exploitation. The increase in legitimate massage therapy has brought a sense of normalcy to seeing massage as mainstream. but that has spilled over to include Asian massage reflexology and foot spas that hide their victims and relocate them often. Mostly non-English speaking Asian women, many over 35, are deceived into traveling to the U.S. They are persuaded by traffickers calling themselves Big Brother or Big Sister, posing as caretakers. Then, they'll take complete control of every aspect of her life. Women may need to support family back home. Once here, they are held by cultural values of honor and repaying all debts. Their traffickers will arrange details of travel and housing, so she owes them and she is trapped. The extreme shame of being deceived and commercial sex keeps her in bondage. Traffickers work by force, fraud, or coercion. These are the qualifiers under the law for adult trafficking. Force could be captivity or the use of violence. Fraud is any deception that is used to convince a person to comply, such as instilling the dream of a life together and then turning her out to prostitute. Coercion uses threat of harm or withholding of the necessities of life and health. It is not uncommon for traffickers to withhold food and water. Financial coercion may be called debt bondage. It is one tactic used to convince a victim to comply. Some traffickers will take a long time and use elaborate psychological manipulation to groom their victims. Violence is inherent in prostitution. According to a 2014 study published in the Annals of Health Law, 95% of sex trafficking survivors reported violence and abuse during their prostitution. The same study showed that almost 85% of trafficking victims use substances to cope. Pornography is a key driver of prostitution buyers. The dehumanization and commodification of people engaged in porn is highly destructive to the innate value we have as human beings. We are designed by our Creator for connection and love. Today's pornography is antithetical to this and fraught with violence. The Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act says that sex trafficking is a severe form of trafficking. Let's talk about pregnancy while being trafficked. As you might imagine, many sex trafficking victims are forced to abort their children. The previously mentioned study found that over half the respondents had undergone at least one abortion. Some had multiple abortions, and many were forced. However, there are several reasons a trafficker would want a woman to continue pregnancy. The way she is being trafficked influences the decision to allow her to have her child. If she's being trafficked for forced labor or begging, her captor may see the child as another resource, a future slave. If she's being prostituted, her pimp might believe he cares for her and wants to have children with her, or it could be a ploy. A pimp could also want to use the child as leverage. Many of us have seen the videos from the Center for Medical Progress's undercover investigation in which David De Leiden, posing as a procurement company representative, exposed Planned Parenthood's illegal trafficking of aborted baby body parts here in the United States. In other places around the world, where organ donation isn't as prevalent as it is here in the U.S., traffickers convince people to sell one of their paired organs, such as a kidney. One such place is Huska, Nepal, called Kidney Valley, because the desperate poverty has caused many to fall prey to organ traffickers. They submit under great duress and social cost, but the hope of a better life for themselves or their family is a powerful hook. More trafficking violence. Child soldiers are victims of human trafficking as recognized in the Child Soldiers Protection Act of 2008. Children, taken captive and forced to kill. They suffer horrendous deprivations. Many watch their families die and their villages burn to the ground. These children suffer severe mental and emotional trauma, along with unimaginable physical violence. A child is defined as any person younger than 18 years of age.